So today, the topic of this particular session is employing unique assessment structures beyond traditional assignments. As more classes are being offered online, a very important question has emerged. Should we change our approach to assessment? In an online remote environment, students have access to resources beyond what they would normally have in a traditional in-person exam. That means as educators, we have to think about what we are really evaluating, what's important, and how we assess students' comprehension beyond answers that can be looked up. Powerful and flexible educational tools like Möbius enable instructors to go beyond traditional assignments and offer creative approaches to assessment. This can include different question types, moving from multiple choice or simple numeric answers to more open-ended answers that require students to give examples or to do some analysis. It can also include different assessment structures. In this session, we'll hear from Paul McGrath on how he has used the Möbius platform to create escape rooms that are used for group assignments. Paul McGrath is a lecturer with the Centre for Education in Mathematics and Computing at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. His background is in mathematical physics, so he tends to teach a lot of math courses geared towards science students. Over the past few years, Paul has been experimenting with gamification in his courses, and today he is joining us to tell us about one of these experiments which makes use of the Möbius platform. Paul, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks, Louise. Just going to share my screen here. All right. All right, well, thanks again. And hello, everyone, and thanks for attending. As Louise said, my name is Paul McGrath, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Waterloo in the Faculty of Math. I'm excited to talk to you today about virtual escape room assignments, which is a project I did alongside my colleague Dan Walchuk in our Calculus for the Sciences course last fall and winter. Just a quick outline of the plan for this talk. I'll first go over our motivation for creating these assignments. In other words, what were we hoping to achieve? I'll then talk about how I actually created these assignments, and this is where Möbius enters the picture. After that, I'll do a demo to show you what these escape rooms actually look like in practice. And finally, we conducted a bunch of surveys of students asking about these escape room assignments. So I'll share with you the results of the feedback students provided on those surveys. So a common question we ask ourselves when teaching first-year students is, how do we facilitate students meeting their peers and beginning to form relationships? For example, to form study groups. Under normal circumstances, this is a challenge, but it was even more so last year when everything was being run virtually. So our first goal was to create an opportunity for students to meet their peers, and in fact, wherever possible, specifically peers in their own programs. The hope being that students would not only begin to talk about the content of our course, but their other courses and their university experiences more generally as well. This ties in with our second goal, which is to encourage students to work together and learn from each other. So not just in our course again, but hopefully other courses as well. Next, we find our science students typically do not overly enjoy their math courses. Not always true, but a lot of the time that's the case. So our next goal was to actually create a few assessments that students would find fun. We thought during the pandemic, more than ever, students would appreciate something a bit more enjoyable than a run-of-the-mill assignment or midterm. So with these three goals in mind, we decided that virtual escape rooms were the way to go. The idea of escape rooms was actually fresh in our minds at the time because we had discussed using in-class escape rooms in previous terms, but we'd opted for other forms of gamification instead. In this case, though, the escape room concept matched nicely with what we wanted and gave us a good excuse to try them out. So having made the decision to use virtual escape rooms, we realized we could add an additional goal here, and that would be to write the escape room stories so as to give the students a sense of being on campus. We thought this would be a nice touch since most students would not otherwise get to experience being on their new campus. We also hope this would give them a sense of belonging to the university community as a whole. So onto the thought process that went into designing the escape room assessments. So first, as best as possible, we wanted to mimic the escape room experience. By that, we mean we wanted each assignment to include puzzles and a story. We also wanted there to be a time limit to escape. And finally, we wanted students to complete puzzles in sequence before being able to progress through the story. So we didn't want them to just be able to skip ahead like in a regular assignment. Although I should say that we experimented with relaxing some of these conditions in the later escape rooms. Anyway, we achieved this setup by creating the assessments in the Möbius platform um, as using adaptive assignments where each room is an adaptive question. So the adaptive assignment feature meant that we could write a bit of code to exercise control over how students move from problem to problem through the story. And the adaptive question feature allowed us to give students multiple attempts to solve the problems they encounter in each room. So if they solve a puzzle correctly, they move to the next room. If they don't, they get another chance until eventually they might run out of chances, at which point their escape room attempt ends. Next thing we wanted to do was incorporate math into the story in a meaningful way. So we did this by framing the math problems and puzzles that they encounter within the context of the story. In other words, the story presents them with a puzzle involving a mathematical problem, and they must pay attention to clues in the story to figure out how to solve that problem. We also wanted to encourage all members within a team to participate. So we didn't want the strongest student to solve each problem while the other students watched in silence. So what we did was try to design each problem so that it would be most efficiently solved through a group effort. This meant giving problems that involved some combination of discussion and multiple calculations that could be performed simultaneously. And we incentivized solving problems efficiently by offering bonus grades to students with the fastest completion times. And we also published a leaderboard, so I imagine bragging rights also served as an incentive for some students at least. Finally, we wanted to minimize technological requirements. So for example, we didn't want slow internet connections to be a problem. Similarly, we didn't want a student's grade to suffer if their internet cut out. So we set up the assignments so that only one player actually needed to access it, and they would then screen share it with their team members. Ideally, all team members would be working together in a video chat, but in a worst case scenario, a team member with a poor internet connection could join with audio only or even just text chat as long as they can see the shared screen. And we allowed teams to have an unlimited number of attempts so that if something did go wrong, they could simply start over without penalty. All right. So now I'd like to show you what one of these assignments looks like. I've opened it up in the assignment editor so that I can jump between questions. But when a team is attempting the assignment, they wouldn't actually have this navigation pane on the left side of the screen. They would only see this question part on the right side of the screen, and they would need to answer it to be able to move on to subsequent questions. So what I've got up here is actually the first escape room that we gave our students, the first of 5 in total, which has the students starting out at the front entrance of the University of Waterloo campus. It tells a bit of story to set up a problem. Specifically, the students are attempting to use an app to find their way to their first calculus quiz, but this app is behaving strangely, and instead of giving them directions, it shows them a set of graphs and presents them with a clue. So in this case, they're always a bit cryptic, but only an odd one can solve this puzzle. Select a graph. So with a bit of discussion, the team members would hopefully realize that they must choose the graph of an odd function. It's not too difficult, but this is the first question, so meant to be a bit of a warm-up. But just to show you what the student experience would be like throughout going through this escape room assignment, suppose they did not select the correct graph. So the third one here is the odd graph. The other ones are all even. So suppose we selected the second graph. They could then check their answer to see if it's correct. And here it would show them that that's not correct. And they can see now they've moved on to attempt 2 of 3. So they actually only have 3 attempts to get this question correct. And if they exhaust their attempts on a question, the escape room ends and they would have to start over. But hopefully after maybe making an attempt and getting it wrong, they discuss it some more and figure it out. If not, each question can also be equipped with hints. So we'd have something here. So they could reveal this, what needs to be odd to solve this, not you. And then they would realize, oh, it's the function that needs to be odd, the function that's being graphed. And so putting that all together, they would come up with the right answer, hopefully, and verify this and see that it's correct. It's important to note here, so I should mention that you can set this up, and the way I've set it up is such that incorrect attempts, so getting the answer wrong, as well as revealing hints, has a cost associated with it. So each question is graded out of 1, so 0.25 for each incorrect attempt, and 0.1 penalty for viewing a hint. So there is a cost associated with making mistakes and viewing hints. You can turn that on and off and change the values if you like. So let's say we pick the correct graph, we click verify, then a little bit of story is revealed, and the student would then see a button down here that says next, and be able to click that to move on to the second room. There's a couple, so in this escape room, there's a couple more multiple choice questions to get them warmed up, and then things start to get a bit more difficult. And while all the stages follow a similar format, to keep things interesting, we've got a variety of question types in here. So for example, in this stage, the students are approaching the entrance to the science teaching complex building on our campus, but they find the door locked by this mechanism that requires them to arrange a set of panels, each of which displays some function. So these can be moved around. From the text, they should hopefully deduce that they must arrange these panels by the domains of the functions that are shown on the panels. So if the students want to solve this puzzle quickly, they would divide and conquer and each determine the domain of one function. Then once they have those worked out, they would compare the domains that they found and observe that they can be patched together to cover the real number line. And the order in which they're patched together determines the ordering of the panels. So notice, since this question is a bit more difficult than and more than just 4 multiple choice options, I've given students 5 attempts here, and I've reduced the penalty for incorrect attempts to 0.15. So these penalties are customizable at the question level. Should also note, you can also give more than 1 hint and adjust the penalty associated with hints. So we also have rooms where students must determine numeric codes to, for example, in this case, locate a room in the building, or there's other questions where they need to determine a code to open a lock. And questions like this one, which requires a code word. So here the students encounter this robot blocking their path, asking for a code word to let them by. To determine that code word, they need to solve this modeling problem and then evaluate the model at different inputs. They can then identify letters in the table, which in turn spell out the code word. So now's a good time to mention that all of these questions are algorithmic. So if the team exhausts their attempts on a question and is forced to start over, on subsequent attempts, they will see variations of the same problems. And so they'll have to solve each one again. So in this case, the model will change every time. And there's about 20 different code words that you might come across. Because of the penalty for incorrect guesses, then retrying the code word you found on a previous attempt is a poor strategy compared to actually having to solve the problem again from scratch. So here we have a question again that looks for a code. This involves taking a composition of functions, and then finally the final room with a puzzle here. They have to solve some true-false problems to determine the correct configuration of some binary switches. As I said before, these questions are all algorithmic. In this case, that means that these true-false statements get pulled from a bank of about 30 statements. So if the students are forced to start the assignment over again, they'll be presented with a different set of statements. Maybe by chance, 1 or 2 may overlap, but for the most part, they'll have to do the problem over again. Anyway, so if a team successfully makes their way through all of the rooms, they'll ultimately end up at this final screen, which gives a conclusion to the story and congratulates them on their achievement. In this escape room, it turns out that all of the puzzles that the students had to solve to get to their calculus quiz were actually set up by their calculus instructor. And in fact, these problems themselves were the quiz. For completeness, I'll just show you what happens if a student exhausts their attempts on any given question. In other words, if they lose, then they're taken to this room. So they see this page where they encounter their professor walking to the parking lot to leave. And the professor tells them that they took too long to get to the quiz, wishes them better luck next time. And they never actually learn that getting to the quiz was the actual test. However, if the team wishes, they can then start the assignment over to try to complete it in full, or at least earn a better score. All right. All right, so what did we learn by running these assessments? So after each escape room, we surveyed our students to get their feedback. The first 3 escape rooms were administered in our Calculus 1 for the Sciences course during fall 2020 term with about 800 students. And rooms 4 and 5 were given in our Calc 2 course in winter 2021 with about 600 students. The vast majority of the 600 students in the second course would have been in both courses. For each escape room, we had roughly a 40% response rate. Not amazing, but there were no incentives for the surveys, and we knew students had a lot on their plates during the pandemic, so we didn't push them too hard to complete them. But still, 40% with these enrollments translates to in the ballpark of 200 to 300 responses for any given escape room. I just want to mention before getting into all the results that, as I mentioned earlier, we did experiment with some changes in the format a bit as we went. For example, allowing teams to continue through to the end of the escape room assignment, even if they got a question wrong. Most of these changes didn't seem to have a significant impact on student perceptions, aside from one, which was running escape room 3 as an individual assessment, so not in groups. So I'll comment on that in a moment. All right, so what did we find? So 70% so across all 5 escape rooms, 70% of students said the escape rooms were useful practice and helped them learn the course content. So that is a big plus. 52% said they liked the escape room assignments. Many students were neutral about them. Only 15% actually reported disliking them. For an audience of science students in math, taking a math course, we were actually quite pleased with those numbers. And even better, 68% said they liked working in groups with their peers, with only 10% disliking that these were group assignments, the rest being neutral. In our experience, students typically really don't like group work in their math courses, so we were really happy about these numbers. One concern we had going into this that I haven't really discussed was scheduling difficulties. So each group was made up of 4 students, and we have a lot of international students at the University of Waterloo. So very likely 4 students in a mix of time zones. However, only 29% of students reported having trouble finding a common time to work on these assignments with their group members. And in fact, across all 4 escape rooms that were run with groups, there was not a single team that I'm aware of that didn't manage to find time during the 1-week interval they had with the assignment available to make at least one attempt. We also had some statements they could agree or disagree with on the survey. 38% of students reported that they actually found the escape rooms were fun. And the way we worded that question, it was an emphatic, like, this assignment was fun. And so that's pretty good. The same percentage reported liking the puzzles, and 30% reported actually liking the stories that I wrote. I'm not much of a story writer, so I was personally pleased with this number, even though maybe it's a bit low. In the future, I may look into finding a creative writing student to help me out, just to get that number up a bit. Finally, Escape Room 3, which I mentioned we ran individually, had the highest disapproval of all the escape rooms. So the highest number of students, percentage of students reporting that they disliked it. Still only at 27%, but it seems like running these types of assignments as group assignments is the way to go. So with that in mind, after the first 3 escape rooms, which are the 3 that took place in the first term, we asked a few additional questions to help us decide if we should continue with these assignments in the second course and if they should continue to be group assignments. And we found 81% of students wanted virtual escape rooms, whether they be group or individual assignments, in their next course. 54% preferred the group format, while only 31% preferred doing them alone, with the remaining 15% being neutral. And coming back to the big question of, did the escape rooms help students form meaningful connections with their peers? About 14% of students reported working with their escape room teammates outside of the escape room assignments. So this is not a huge number, but I wouldn't really expect huge numbers here. So I still see this as having succeeded at connecting actually a decent number of students that otherwise would not have had the chance to meet one another. So to summarize, we found the escape rooms to be a fun activity which allowed students to meet one another, collaborate, and practice the course material together. And I honestly don't know how I've been able to put these together without Möbius, which is why I'm here today doing this presentation on behalf of Digital Ed. So thanks a lot. Thanks for listening. I think we still have a bit of time for questions. I've put my contact info here, and my colleague Dan that I worked on this with, his contact info is here as well in case you want to connect after the session. But yeah, I'm happy to take questions now as well. Thanks again.
Thanks, Paul. That was a great presentation. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll answer them. To start with, I just wanted to ask, how did you determine how many rooms were going to be in the escape room? And like, how did you figure out how much time you expected that it would take the students?
It was a bit of just playing around and getting, I had some students, some upper year students do some testing for me, as well as some instructors. Our goal, we wanted to work with like a 60-minute time limit. That was our goal because we didn't want students spending forever on these. And we wanted it to be sort of something that, you know, most teams of 4 students would be able to complete these in 60 minutes. Really strong teams might be able to do it in, you know, 40 to 50 minutes or something like that. So I started writing the story, and Dan Walchuk, who I worked with, so he sort of helped me with brainstorming questions. And once I sort of ballparked that it would probably be on the order of like 8 to 10 questions. And so I just went ahead and made eight questions or so, I think, for the first escape room. And then I had a couple people test them, and they seemed to be roughly the right length. I may have added one question at the beginning or removed one. It's a long time ago now. But yeah, just a bit of playing around, and that seemed to be the right number of questions roughly. And so the later escape rooms as well, all were around 8 to 9 questions.
Great. And now, are you working on some new ones? Are you thinking of doing escape rooms in some other courses, or what are your thoughts sort of going forward?
So the feedback we got was positive. So we're going to be using these again this year in our next offerings of Calc 1 and Calc 2 for the sciences. I'm planning to, my current plan is to sort of make a new version of these, like a next iteration, improve these, make some of the questions a bit more maybe interactive. I would like to, I did have a lot of fun with these, so I would like to do them in other courses. I haven't made definite plans to do it with any of the actual on-campus courses I'm teaching, but I have been in discussions with a couple people to do some outreach escape rooms. So I work for the Center for Education, Math and Computing, and we've talked about making some escape rooms that we would just make available on our website for anyone to try out.
Great, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions here. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you, Paul, for sharing your thoughts on the escape rooms and how you've created those.
Great, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.